I don't know, where was I? In the middle of the description of the beginning of this piece of Torah, that we learned parts of it a year, maybe half a year ago. This interview with the letters, that, and it's in the beginning of the Hakdamah of the Zohar, which is like 100-page document unto itself. The Zohar itself is like 8 volumes. It's probably 2,000 pages, and they put this as one of the first pieces in the whole Zohar, and it's from Rav Hamnuna Saba. Rav Hamnuna Saba was a Tana from the I want to say the middle of the Second Temple, but he was before Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. He's buried in Meron, right outside the camp, if you will. And hear me? Still, are we with it?
Estoy haciendo papas, ¿quieres?
Okay, maybe some people can turn their microphone. I heard some background noise. Okay. So anyway, so the fact that this is in the beginning of the Zohar is teaching us a lot, because when we begin with the letters having an interview with God, what is going on? Okay, first of all, it tells you that according to the Zohar, the letters are living things, and they can talk, and they can defend themselves, and they can put forward their arguments for themselves, which we're going to see all of that. But what does that mean to our modern ears, that letters, shapes with vowels and names have personalities, and they have desire, and they have pride, and they have interest, and they want to be in God's book? What is going on? So, I mean, I'm asking you these questions rhetorically. I would assume if we were together that it would be more of an open discussion. It's a little more difficult here, but if you have any ideas, please write in. Okay. And so, but this idea of the anthropomorphism, right? Turning something that's static, not alive, into something that's alive. This is happening all the time in the Zohar. And it happens in the Chumash too. We're just not, it's not on the Pshat level, so we don't see it as readily. But that everything in the Torah world has soul, and soul means life, and soul also means personality, and soul also means ratzon, or desire, or kavanah, intention. So how do we relate to an alphabetic letter system as a 22 people, 22 personalities operating in a system of communication? How do we relate to that? Is it a cartoon? Are we talking about some fantasy world? Is the Zohar expecting us to stretch our imaginations beyond the limit? And you know, I've been around this world a little bit in terms of the experience of Torah and people learning Zohar and Kabbalah. And a lot of people, they're not going there. They're not going to anthropomorphic letters that have personalities that talk back to God. No, Avraham. It's a metaphor. It's an analogy. Don't take it directly. And you know what? I don't buy that, because just as strongly as I might sit here and try to prove to you that these letters are living entities of God's mind, his own communication system with himself and reality, they have to prove the otherwise, and they never can. You know, just recently, they're always coming up with the same thing. Rabbi Shimon didn't write the Zohar. It was written by a guy in Spain in the 12th century, Rabbi Moshe de Leon. And you know, and so they love that argument. And people love to go to that kind of controversy. But for a person who spends 20 or 30 years in the Zohar, there's just no way that one human being wrote this. And there's no way that somebody They say that, oh, he used the name, there's a holy name that you can use for writing that will inspire your writing faculty in your mind. There's many holy names. And I'm not recommending you go jumping in to find that name so you write a better book, because you have to be on the level to use God's names. And it's not a simple matter. However, these same people, they're the same ones that are undercutting other parts of Torah. You see, they're going to undercut the halacha. That's just the rabbis. They're giving us a stringent interpretation, and they don't really mean that. And so when you ever hear these arguments, just don't listen. Just walk away. Decide in your own heart what's true for you. Do your own investigation. It's like fake news today. Is the corona true or not? Is the shot good or not? All these arguments. We have to do our own research, especially in our relationship with God. And especially when we're talking about such refined ideas as the ones that we're going to look at tonight. And that builds our own antenna, by the way. We need spiritual antenna, little psychic antenna, because other people are not going to hear or see or know what you see and hear and know. And you're not going to hear and see and know what they know. And it's for me, it's an important issue, because there are people whose faith is not really the type of faith that you want to emulate, right? There's fallen faith. Fallen faith means, oh, I used to believe in God, but now I understand it differently. I know many people like this. The Torah challenges every single person at every single level. And you could be a tzaddik one day, like Rabbi Yeshua Kohen Gadol. 80 years he was Kohen Gadol, because it's the kind of job, you only leave it when you die. And then he decided that there was two rishiyot, there's God and there's me and the angels, and therefore, and he split. He literally lost his faith in the unity of creation, the unity of the Creator with creation and with all human souls. So that happens to the highest person. So we shouldn't, first of all, feel bad if our faith is not whole, but we should be scientists. Now, what do scientists have? They have the empirical method. They mean we're going to test things. We're going to look at things. We're going to be open to questions. And when I don't know something, I say, I don't know. And I'm open to learning. I don't have to believe. I don't have to not believe, but I have to investigate. I have to search. So when we talk about letters, we're talking about energy fields that God created to create the world with. These are the tools that he proceeded to create the world with. Now, what does that mean? Okay, well, we can understand the idea of an energy field. It has a vibration, it has a frequency, it has a tone, it has shape. Sound has shape, right? And so on and so forth. We understand the idea of radiation, of a magnetic radiation. There's all kinds of sciences filled out the picture a lot. However, understand that the way you really get to know these things is when you live it yourself. The way you experience the letters themselves as living beings can only happen to you in your own experience. I can talk about it all night. I can talk about my own experiences. And thank God I've had a few experiences where I said, this is not normal. When you go into a trance and you start seeing letters dancing, communicating to you, either you're hallucinating and, someone spiked your drink, I don't know, or maybe, just maybe, your soul came out of your body and God showed you something, because he wants you to believe in him and his Torah, and especially the Torah of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who was a spark of the soul of Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu. Okay. So with all that said, and I'll add more as we go, let's begin. And we're in as I said, the Hakdamah, the beginning of the Zohar, and it begins, Kad ba'ed lemevre alma, when God wanted to create the world. Atu kol atvan kame misofo ad reshaihu. All the letters came before God from the end back to the beginning. In other words, You might think that if there was an interview with God interviewing all his letters, they would start normally from the beginning to the end. No, they come backwards. Now, why that is, we're going to learn slowly. And the beginning, okay, what's the last letter? What came first? Shariat at Taf the al Bresha. And the letter Taf came in first before God. Vamra. And the letter Taf said, Ribono Shalolam. Noach lefanecha, livro bi ha'olam. It's a good idea, God. You should create the world with me first. Now, what this letter is clearly showing pride, a little bit of arrogance, a little bit of, arrogance is probably too strong a word. Pride is good enough. And he wants to be the first letter. He wants to be the first letter in the Torah, and he wants God to begin a creation with him. So what I want to introduce to you here, this first idea, is that God thinks to himself just like you and I do. Because we're going to learn in another line that it says here in a previous line, כאשר ירצה לקדוש ברוך הוא לברוא את העולם, כל האותיות היו סתומות. All the letters were closed in the beginning of creation. Now there's another place where it tells us they were like, listen closely, like seeds inside an egg. Like in a not an egg, that's the wrong word. Seeds inside a flower bulb. You know, like some flowers, you cut them open and all these little seeds fall out. So that's what the Zohar's metaphor for the letters. In the beginning, the letters themselves were not open. They were like embryos. They were like fetuses. And it describes how the letters came out and opened up. So there's something profound happening with the creation of the letters. And it says the letters were closed and for 2,000 years until God created the world. In other words, this is 2,000 years before Bereshit bara Elokim, before God started the whole story. Hu haya mistakel HaKadosh Baruch Hu u'mishtashea behem. God would gaze at the letters, and mishtashea means to literally play, like a child plays with a toy, but it's a little more elevated than that. But that's what God was doing with the letters for 2,000 years. You think he'd get bored? No, he didn't get bored. And so what it's telling us that you see that Hashem is creating his own creativity. He's creating the tools of his creation. Now, if you've ever tried to build something and not had the right tools, I've been on a few of those adventures. You have your car breaks down and you have to invent a wrench, or you have to invent a jack, or you have to invent make a one time I had to make a fan belt out of another piece of rubber. You do what you got to do when you got to do it, right? And so Hashem looked at these letters and he's playing with them, he's working with them, he's profoundly attached to what he's doing. 2,000 years, you got to be really into it. Now, are those godly years or human years? That's another question, because we know one godly year is 365,000 human years. Because as King Moshe Rabbeinu said in the 90th chapter of Tehillim, right? Because one day in your eyes is like 1,000 years. So we use that as a mathematical expression of God's passage of time and ours. All right? And so whichever calendar this particular piece of Zohar is telling us, it's telling us that these letters, it's like we're invested with his life force. And that's the secret. That's the first secret why we have the holy chutzpah to say that the letters are living beings. Because you're alive. You're sitting here on Lighthouse on Thursday evening. You're alive. You think you're alive. I think I'm alive. Well, we're trying, right? we don't even know what real life is. No, we on human terms, maybe we do. But these letters, since they are invested with his life force, they're alive, just like we are. And actually, he uses them to create us, right? Because he hasn't created the world yet. And 2,000 years, he's looking at these letters and shaping them and comparing them and weighing them and defining them and giving them names and giving them attaching sound to their shapes. This is a profound activity. But what's even more profound is that he used these letters to create us. How? Through our names. Now, this is something I've talked about before. It's something I do. I write private essays for people about their names and so on and so forth. But the idea that we are made of letters is just astounding. When you think about the mind being a word processor, it makes more sense. And when we try to get down to what letters really are, they're quantities of sound vibration. And so they have weight, they have number, they have relative mercy and judgment attached to them. So God is really involved in the creation of the Aleph Bet. And now the letters come in, they all want to put their foot forward and say, we should create the world. If you want, you can suggest this to yourself. I'm not even sure I could support the idea. I'd have to probably look all over the Torah world and I probably wouldn't find it. But the idea that God, when he's interviewing these letters, he's thinking thoughts into their mind. In other words, the letters are being given life force from God, and then they're speaking back to him his own thoughts. Why do I say that? Because the tough, what's the tough? It comes in, it's the last letter, it comes in first. And usually when that happens, it's a signification of judgment preceding mercy. And you know what? Guess what, folks? That's how our minds work. We judge things and then we get a little softer in the heart. And then we can look at people and say, wait, Avraham, chill out. Where's your love? Where's your compassion? Where's your patience? But that's the way we work. Oftentimes we judge first, and then we have to enclose judgment with mercy, with compassion. And so whenever we see this backwards rendition of the Aleph Bet, that's also a signifier of the transition from judgment to mercy. And keep that in mind because you'll see it in other places. Okay, so the tough comes in first and it says, Master of the world, isn't it good before you that you create the world with me? Why? He tells him why. The ant hotama de gushpanka dilach emet. That the tough says, I am the seal of your seal, which is truth. Meaning what? That the real seal of God is truth. Now, this is not truth at Harvard or at some other think tank. This is divine truth. Okay, and the last letter in the word ta emet is truth, and the last letter of emet is tough. So he's saying, I'm the seal of your seal, because the last letter in any word is the seal, like a seal on an envelope. It's the seal of the word. Now, elsewhere, we've learned that try to say a word and not say the last letter. What happens? What happens most of the time? If I say the word Yisrael, but I drop the lamed, Yisra, you're left hanging in space, but it clips the whole meaning of the word. Yisra, I need that ale at the end, that lamed. So you see, that's what it means that the last letter is the seal of the word, because the seal of the word is its meaning. And if you cut the end of the word, you cut the meaning. So the tough is coming in saying, I am the seal of your seal, God. You should create the world with me. You're truth, I'm truth. It's a nice argument, kind of. Va'ant it kriat emet, and you, God, are called emet. We say it in the morning davening, Hashem Elokeichem emet, right? Your God, it says Hashem, Ani Hashem Elokeichem emet. So, who else can say they're emet? if God is the real truth, then I'm just kind of like we're gradations of emet. Okay, va'antit kriat emet. Ye'ut lamalka. It is fitting for the king lemishrei ba'at emet. It is fitting to begin the creation with the letter Taf of emet. Ulivrobi ha'olam, and create the world in me. Wow, that's a big request, isn't it? Create the world in me. What does he mean? Well, first of all, what I hear is that you don't need 22 letters to create the world. He's telling God, you can create the whole world in me. One letter. So that seems a bit, we're already out there in the world of abstraction, but to say that 22 letters God used to create the world, and now we're saying that one could do it. But we know that all the letters are made from all the letters, that all the letters are made from a point, which is a yud. And then that yud is stretched into a vav, and that vav is curved into a kaf. And then it's swung back up into another vav, and etc. That's how all the letters are created. God is literally writing when he creates the aleph bet, and he uses these parts, the dot, the dash, and the curve to create all letters. It's like what they used to call that Morse code, right? I don't think anybody uses that anymore, unless you have to. It's a little slower than the internet. Okay. But still, so there is this idea, well, the Tuf could be, if it's made of all other letters, then it could create the whole world. That's the argument that Tuf is giving to God. So we got to also be thinking ahead. Now, what's God going to answer? It's such a nice argument. Your truth, I'm your seal, you're my, okay. Amar la kuchabrihu. So God said, Yeut ante zakaan. He says, fitting you are, and meritorious you are. Ella, rather, hold on. Late ant kedai lemivrei bachalma. It is not enough. It is not a good idea to create the world with you. Why? Ho'il, since va'ant zemina lemecheve rashim al mitzchin the guvrin mehemanim. Since you are brought into your zemina, literally means like chosen to or brought into the meheve rashim, to be the insignia, the impression on the foreheads of the faithful warriors. Wow. Where do we see that? Well, of course, Cain. Cain got a tuft on his forehead so that he would be protected from the animals. After he killed Hevel, he lost his divine soul. He became an animal. A human being without his divine soul is just another eating, sleeping, drinking, etc. being. We need that download of software to be able to think and process and contemplate. And when Cain did what he did, he lost that. So God put the seal, the tuft on his forehead to protect him, because all the other animals said, oh, here's a nice lunch, right? And the animals were big back then, as it seems like the fossil record wants to teach us. So Cain got a letter tuft. And so the tuft is being told, be happy, tuft. I'm using you as a type of seal also on the foreheads of warriors. Let's see where it goes. Dikimu oraita me aleph v'atav. Now we're not talking just about Cain here, the first example, but he's talking about the letter tav is put onto the foreheads of people who have kept the whole Torah. Wow, well, we went somewhere else completely. Kiemu oraita. They fulfilled the Torah from Aleph ad Taf. Now that's a phrase you'll see a lot in Kabbalah, Aleph ad Taf. The word et, Bereshit bara Elokim, et Shemayim ve'et haaretz. And the Gemara has a whole sugya about that Rabbi Akiva would doresh all the ets of the Torah. Every time Aleph Taf appears, Rabbi Akiva has a drush for it, because it's a I guess you would call it in English grammar. It's like a participle. That's an old word you remember from 8th grade, right? The participle is like a word that English has lots of participles, but a lot of languages don't. And it's one of those filler words. That's a pretty vague definition, I know, but it's still, the word et in Hebrew is like that. You don't have to have it, but it's a signifier of something else. It brings emphasis to something. Et Shemayim, et haaretz. Anyways, that's Aleph and Taf. And Taf is being told, relax, Taf. You're not going to be the creator of the world. You're going to be on the forehead of the tzaddikim who keep the whole Torah. Well, that's a nice offer. And in your impression, you mutun. Oi. But with the impression of your image, your shape, Taf, will also be the image of death. The idea of death. Because we have the word met. Mem, Taf means death. Met. V'od, and furthermore, the ant hotama damavet, you are the seal of death. Ho'il the ant kach, that you are this way. Leint ant kedai lemivrei ba'almah umiyad nafkat. And he tells him, therefore, since you're the seal of death, it is not fitting that we create the world with you, because remember, God has nothing to do with death. Death is a created concept by God. God never dies. He never will die. He never can die. And so it is a concept created with the introduction of man into reality. But nonetheless, God said, I'm not going to use you, Taf, for creating this world of mine, because I'm all life. And I'm giving my life over to this creation. And I want this creation to live forever too. And don't listen to all the scientists that say, the sun's going to burn us out and we're all going to be ashes in the universe floating around. It's not the way it's going to work. Okay, so here we've got a nice little picture of the first letter being interviewed by God. But you see that we have to ask questions when we learn Zohar. We can't be satisfied with just raw material. Now, a lot of times we ask questions and we don't get answers. So what do? Well, you look inside, you check the commentators, but you also check your own gut. You check your heart, you check your mind. You be the letter, be in the dialogue. This is something that, it's like in drama class, I attended a few of those. Life was already dramatic enough. But, to be somebody else, you have to be an actor, you got to be somebody else. So when you enter into that stage, that level where you can be somebody else, then you can understand, well, this letter has pride, this letter feels connected to truth. But the word emet itself, look at the word. If you take the aleph, which is the first letter, which means it's that we've learned elsewhere, the aleph means alufo shel olam, the master, the champion of the world, of course, is God, and aleph is used in many, many holy names. You take aleph away from emet and you get met, you get death. So you cannot take God out of the equation without creating something not good that leads to death. So now this whole idea, we should ask some other questions. That this word Taf is not only put on the forehead of Cain, because also remember, Cain, even though he did a horrible thing, he was a giant. He was a master of soul. He was, one generation removed from Adam. And that means he had all the other inclusive souls in him. and a great portion of humanity goes back through his genetic trail. However, the implication here is that the righteous, the rabbis, the holy people that keep the whole Torah, they get a tuft on their forehead. Meaning it is a sign between Hashem and the world about this person's level. I was once at a Suda with Rav Kaduri, and somebody had the chutzpah to ask the Rav Kaduri, is it true, Rav, that you can read people's foreheads? And Rav Kaduri chuckled, his famous chuckle. If you ever heard it, you'd remember. Is it true, Rav, that you don't ask rabbis those kind of questions, because first of all, it's embarrassing if it's true or if it's not true. Either way, there's embarrassment involved, right? But Bistama, we are told that elsewhere, Rabbi Nachman talks about it in Likutei Moharan, that when a person reaches a certain level of spiritual purity, that he can see things on someone's forehead. And the Arizal talks about it, Rabbi Chaim Vital talks about it. And Rabbi Chaim Vital had several experiences where the Arizal would look at his forehead and tell him exactly what he did or didn't do. And he told him how. He said, I can see the letters on your forehead. So you see, it starts to tie up a little bit here. The Zohar says he had a letter on his forehead. The righteous have a letter on the forehead. The tzaddik can see the forehead. So you see, there's something going on. Why the forehead, folks? These lines, by the way, in your forehead are not about that. That's not what we're talking about. The lines in the forehead, in the book of, in Zohar, in Parshat Yitro, it says the lines in the forehead are actually the lines of previous incarnations. So that's a separate chokhmah unto itself. But here we're talking about the radiation, the energy of the soul comes out of here, because this is where the neshama resides. This is where your upper software is. This is where your spiritual radiation is coming out of your forehead. So that makes sense then why the rabbi would say that he could see things on a person's forehead. Because this is the broadcasting unit right up here. Okay, because this is where the most of the light of your being emerges. Is from this part, your eyes and your forehead. And the whole face in general, of course. And earlier today on my Patreon class, there's a question I fielded many times, and I asked to myself 30 years ago, where does physical and spiritual meet? You ever ask that question? I'm sure some of you have. Where does the physical world meet the spiritual world? It's a very logical question to ask. Here I am, a very physical person, with my ponytail driving across America in a van. And suddenly I'm confronted with the world of Torah and Kabbalah and Zohar. And I'm like, wait a minute, what's going on here? I didn't drive across America to become religious, to learn Zohar. I was on my way to Hollywood. Well, I asked that question and God showed me. How did he show me? Well, basically, it was very clear from logic. There were other events I'm not going to talk about now, but from logic, when the rabbis that I learned with taught that your soul is in your head, and then your face is the window, and your eyes especially are the expression of where you are at any one time, I said, oh, that's simple enough. If your soul is made of emotions and thoughts and feelings, I guess emotions are feelings, right? Thoughts and feelings and impulses, those are non-physical things. A thought is a non-physical thing. Now, it might cause electronic reaction in the nerves of your brain that already is making it more physical. But when you have a thought or a feeling, it shows where does it show up? On your face. So if you ask yourself the question again, where does the physical meet the spiritual? It's right there between what's coming out of you onto your face. Between your face and your soul, they interface. Well, forgive me, I couldn't resist. But that's what it's telling us. The interface of the physical and spiritual is right here on our face, because that's what's happening. If you're happy, you can look at somebody and tell if they're happy. You can look at somebody and tell if they're not happy. You can look at somebody and tell if they're hiding it, whatever they're hiding. And so, it's because their soul is their spiritual part is emerging through the physical. There is a tandem partnership going on between the physical and the spiritual. And we need to train ourselves to remember that and to look at it that way. And it's a quite astounding thing if you're sitting with people and you remind yourself, this person is not their body and their jewelry and their $500 dress. That's probably not very much expensive dress anymore, right? And they're not their makeup and they're not the hairdo. There's a being inside that costume. And that's the one we want to connect to. And that's, by the way, that's a big part of what we're supposed to be doing on Purim. Is to, we dress up in order to we learn about who we really are, or at least maybe who we want to be. And those are all interesting teachings for another class, perhaps. Okay. So we've done one letter. Where do we go? Well, we're going backwards. So before Taf was Shin. Alat od Shin Kameh. So the letter Shin came in before God. Now remember, God has all these letters there. He's weighing them. He's interviewing them. He's checking them out. What arguments are they going to present to me to use them as the first letter? But maybe it's God thinking what letter I should put first. Maybe. So the letter Shin came in. Amra Kameh Ribon Almin. He said, Master of the world, Naicha Kamach, it should be good before you, Limivrebi Alma, that you should use me to create the world. Devi in me, Ikre Shimcha Shaddai. That in me, you are called in your name, Shin Dalad Yud, which is an important name. Obviously, it means the Russian Tevot, the rabbis teach, Amar Olamodai, that at a certain point on the sixth day of creation, God said, okay, enough, stop. And as a friend reminded me, if you were Rembrandt and you were painting the Mona Lisa and you just kept painting, you would ruin your masterpiece in a few strokes, right? So part of being a master is knowing when to stop. The paintbrush or the mouth or the camera, whatever it might be. So the Shin is going in saying, I'm part of this holy name of stop. If you don't have brakes, doesn't matter how good your car is. And that includes the mind. Right? That you call me this name. Now, this is the name, by the way, that's associated with the sphere of Yesod, which is called the foundation, which is the Siyum Aguf. It's where the torso ends, which is important because the legs, we only have legs because we need them in a three-dimensional world. In heaven, you don't need legs. You fly in your mind. But okay. So the real essential part of a person is from the torso up to the top of the head. Okay, with that said, we understand also that this name has to do with loyalty, sexual purity, and recreating the human image, the godly image in man. Okay, so the Shin is pulling some heavy weight. It is fitting that you should create me with the world with your holy name. And God says, see how God always answers positive first. This is good office politics. You're fitting, letter Shin, Vatavant, and you are good. Ukashotant, and you are truthful. Wonderful. You feel good if God said those things to you, right? However, other letters, false atvan de ziyufa, There are letters. I don't want to translate that properly. Right, that's what I thought. Other letters are going to take you and falsify you, right? The atvan, other letters, the yufa are going to falsify you, not lean. And mehevei maho lo ba'en lemivrei bachalma, and they're going to use you to create falsehood, and therefore I do not want to use you to create the world, because falsehood is obviously the opposite of what God is about. To begin the lo it kayam shikra, and in order that sheker will not be established. See, sheker, falsehood, we say it has no legs. It does not stand on anything but some little stem of truth. And God doesn't want to create the world because the letters Kuf and Resh took the shin and created the concept sheker. Right? And he tells us that if the letters Kuf and Resh take you, they create the concept of sheker. Of course, they create other tserufim, other combinations as well. The shin Kuf Resh sheker is also Kuf Resh shin, kesher, or Kuf shin Resh, excuse me, kesher, or keresh, like some of my jokes, right? A board in English. And so you see here, wow, it's always deeper than we think. Because the shin, God is not blaming the shin, you see. He's blaming these other letters. So he's positive in a way, even though he's rejecting the shin from being the letter that God used to create the world. All right, what other questions do we see here? I think what stands out to me first is that he's telling Shin, you're truthful. But in the world that I'm creating, guess what's going to happen? Truth and falsehood are going to get all mixed up. And falsehood is going to take truth and twist it around and give it a new spin. Does that sound familiar? That there has to be some kernel of truth in every lie. And that's what falsehood is always trying to do. Find some little bit of truth and stretch it and exaggerate it and do all kinds of things that make life miserable, especially if you watch too much news. Okay. So we see here that the letter Shin has, a powerful claim. I'm part of your divine name, that you need this divine name. I'm the root of this divine name. But it's not enough because the world will take the Shin and misuse it. Okay. How are we doing over here? I haven't who is this? Jose says, I remember those days living in the van. Well, I got a few apartments, the van was just getting from New Orleans to LA and up to Seattle and et cetera, the journey goes. But how are we doing on time? I have no idea. 2:00 already. Well, we wasted a lot of time with our microphone issues. So we're gonna have to keep going, folks. I don't want to put you to sleep or anything, but let's do another one. So now the Zohar is going to extrapolate, is going to step back and make a couple statements. Mikan mandavai lemeimar shikra. From here, we learn that a person that wants to say falsehood, yitol yisoda dekishod dekadmeta. Right. The first thing he does is what we said. The first thing he does is take a piece of truth, ulovata yokim le shikra, and from that truth he'll create the falsehood. The ha'ochin at kashotiu, because the letter shin is truthful. At kashotiu avatan it's a haduba, because it's beautiful that the letter od is truth also because the forefathers, which are of course are Avraham, and Yaakov, but in the tree of life they are Chesed, Gevurah, and Tiferet, these three powers, which were exemplified the most in the forefathers. the three powers were unified in the shin. So you have this shin, right? You see my hand here. The three fingers are the three staffs. The three portions of the shin are these three powers, and they are unified together in that idea of the letter shin. So it's another form of praise. However, but kuf reish, kuf reish, these next two letters that we're coming to, atvan de achziu la al sitra bisha inun. Oy, oy, oy. Look what he tells us. The kuf and the reish open. See, every letter, everything about the letters, every single thing that you see in the graphic reality of an alphabet, the holy language, has importance, including just the way the letters face. Remember, we've learned before, the alphabet is like this, a continuum of power. It starts with Aleph, the purest. It ends with Taf, the least pure. So we move from purity, the creation in its perfection in the beginning, until Taf, which is death, the opposite. Any letter that faces to the left is considered facing to the side of evil. It's notea. It leans to the left a little bit. It leans. Whereas if a letter opens to the right, it's considered connecting to the letter behind it. And each of the letters, by the way, they have relationships to the letters beside them on both left and right. So the letters that face back towards the Aleph, they're considered holier letters. Can we get an example? Well, not even they face back, but they don't necessarily face left. I'm looking, thinking. Like the letter Vav, it doesn't face either way. The letter Hey has an opening to the left. It's called a window. The letter Resh and Kuf are completely facing left. So, anyways, that's what it's going in that direction here. Otiot mar'ot al tzad ra'hen. They're teaching about the side of evil. Kedei litkayem lukhot hen ot shin. In order that they can take the letter shin. Wow, that's so funny. It's saying that the letter kuf and resh are facing to the shin so they can steal the shin, like kidnap it. B'tocho v'niyeh kesher, and there'll be a kesher between them. So the kuf and the resh, they're letters, right? They're like your neighbors, one on the right, one on the left. But they want that shit in the middle, because then they create kesher, and that's a good thing. In general, the idea of kesher is a good thing in Kabbalah, because kesher is part of tikkun olam. The pirud, right, separation, that's called tohu vavohu. That's the chaos we don't want to go to. Right? And when the shin saw this, he left before God's presence. In other words, the argument was enough. But look at that, that the letters, not only they have relationships with God about what they want to do, they all want to create the world, they have relationships to the other letters. Now, what's happening here? These letters are shapes created by God, and he's investing them with personality, and he's investing them with will. That the kuf and the resh have a will. What's their will? To trap the shin between them, to create kesher. Now, is that bad or good? Well, it's bad if they put the shin first, because then it's sheker. But again, if we could just try to stay out of the normal everyday logic that we have when we think about things, and open up our perception window a little bit, we see, wait a minute. If the kuf and the resh are considered not so good, and they're going to try to steal the shin to create kesher, that's a good thing. Now, what the Zohar is saying is no, that they really want the shin to put it in the beginning to create sheker, but not necessarily. You see, what this is teaching us is that all of us have this too. That part of us wants truth, but part of us is susceptible to sheker. It's very easy. I watched one of these TED Talks about, from one of these CIA people where they teach them how to recognize truth in people, right? It's interesting. There's some Torah concept behind that, some of it, psychology as well, obviously. And they were saying, going around the audience, like, does anybody here not lie? And everybody's looking at each other. Well, I didn't really mean to, but almost nobody could say that they didn't lie. Where are we at? Okay, so I just remembered a nice story from the Ben Ish Chai, the holy Ben Ish Chai, Rabbi Yosef Chaim. Here's a story like this. It's a mashal. But there was once a thief. Back in the days, they used to kill thieves. They didn't give them 90 days, right? And the thief was going to be killed, and they brought him before the king. And they said, do you have any last words before we hang you for stealing? And the thief said, well, actually, yes, I want to ask a question. And this is a treasure that I have, a very special treasure. And they said, okay, well, tell me what it is. And he said, well, before I reveal the treasure, I have to ask you all a question. So, okay, go ahead. So there were two ministers there with the king at the time. And he said to one of them, have you ever stolen? And he said, well, when I was a kid, I did take some candy, And then the second minister was actually the treasurer of the kingdom. And he said, have you ever taken anything? And he's, oh, well, listen, I deal with all the king's wealth all day long, and I have millions, trillions, whatever, of of transactions taking place. And I guess, well, he kind of wound his way down to, yeah, I think I probably have made that mistake. He's saying this in front of the king. He doesn't really want to, right? And then the thief addresses the king. And he says, have you ever stolen anything? And the king said, well, there was a time, I remember, when I did lie to my father. And so the thief said, and you are going to kill me because I stole for a loaf of bread to eat, to stay alive. And all of you stole not to stay alive. Now you're going to kill me for trying to stay alive when you did the same thing? And the king looked at him and said, you're right. And he let him go. So you see, everything is relative to a situation, but the idea here is stealing is like they all told the truth when they had to, even in front of the king, and even in front of the thief. Now, if they'd been at any cocktail party, would they have been that honest? I don't know. But you see, so honesty is one of these very difficult things. And so even in this little drama with the letters, we see that the letter shin is being used to create a concept, sheker. And, we don't want to be used. And the Torah has very strict laws about this, that if you hear somebody lying, for example, if you're in a business negotiation and somebody's lying, you're obligated to tell the other people. You can't hiding information is called lying in Torah, in true honesty. The least you can do is you have to back out. But okay, there's situations, and look, if you're dealing with the mafia, you don't want to knock on the door in the middle of the night either. You shouldn't be dealing with the mafia at all. So, but still, I think we get the idea here that these letters are these living powers. They represent forces. They have personality, and when we look at it this way, it creates a certain connection to them that in your learning and in your prayer, when you say Tehillim, that understand that an idea is a living thing made of living letters, and it lives where inside your mind, and it has power, and it has influence, and this is something that, well, once you recognize it, language itself becomes something altogether different, and it really changes. It makes Torah more precious, and that, of course, what can you ask for, then you, because it's like you're returning to your father, the king. You're no longer outside the palace, and it doesn't matter how much you know. You just have to know these ideas, and then you go slowly, word by word. I used to write notebook after notebook of words, because if I didn't write them down, a dictionary is not enough. You have to write them down, because your writing makes an inscription in your mind, and it's not enough to write it on your phone either. And because the ink and the pencil and the paper are all part of a spiritual process to bring something spiritual, what did we say earlier, from the spiritual to the physical, to pass over the interface between the inner life and the outer life. We need to pick up a pen or a pencil and write things down on paper. And if you try, you'll see what I mean. It's a spiritual process, and I don't think it works with pixels, so what can I say? It's getting late, folks. Want to do one more? We should do the tzaddik. Because, well, no, I'm jumping here. Wait a second. Okay, well, we ended with the shin. And guess what happens? The Zohar jumps right to the tzaddik. The kuf and the resh are automatically dismissed, at least for now, which is very interesting. So nichnas, right? Alat, ot, tzaddik. The tzaddik comes in before God. Amra kamei, ribon alma, master of the world, naicha. You see, every time it's the same language, that they're all using the same language. So is that a script or what? That's an interesting question. Nonetheless, he comes in before God, it's fitting that you create the world through me. Ta'ant be hatimin tzadikim, because you used me to identify the tzaddik, the righteous person, the person who will fulfill your will and fix the world, or at least fix himself. And therefore, you should use such a letter like me to create the world, because I represent righteousness. My name is righteousness, tzaddik, tzaddik. Va'ant it kri'at tzaddik, and you are called the tzaddik of the world. Be Rashim, and you therefore, the whole idea of tzaddik, which you are called, is inscribed in me. We have a tight connection, you and me, God. The tzaddik saying. And it's written, Ki tzaddik Hashem tzedakot ahav. Right? That's from Tehillim, Yud Aleph. It says here, the tzaddik, God is a tzaddik, and God loves charity. Loving that charity. And everybody should give to the Lighthouse. And in me, it is fitting to create the world. The whole Torah is about charity. God's creation is an act of charity. He did not have to create the world, and he did. Okay, and the Torah is about creating the concept of charity. And Avraham Avinu was the one who sanctified the idea of charity by opening up his house. Okay, Amar le tzaddik. Well, Amarle here is Hashem says back to the tzaddik. Tzaddik, aunt. Right? Tzaddik, you're a tzaddik. Very nice. God again begins with the compliment. Aval an tzarich lemehevet mira. Oh, However, you have to be hidden. A tzaddik is supposed to be a hidden guy. How do we drive that with Facebook, right? Tzaddik mehave l'timira. And you do not need to be revealed so much. One of the spiritual rules that kind of came down was that you can do more when you're hidden than when you're revealed. Now you might think, wait a minute, no, that's not true, Avraham. If you're revealed, you have power, you have influence, and if you have money, you can do more. And if you have a good name, you can do more. And if people know you, they're willing to listen more. But you see, that's all in the external world. In the internal world, the more hidden you are, the more places you can go, the more things you can accomplish. And so that's a very personal, individual question. Are you meant to be a hidden person or a revealed person? There are people that just have to be revealed. That's who they are. That's God made them that way. Rabbi Nachman talks about that as well. He says most people need to be hidden, but there are certain righteous people that need to be revealed. That's their job, and it's not an envious job. Okay, so God is telling the tzaddik, you need to be hidden, tzaddik. Begin, why? In order that you won't give pitchon peh in Torah language means an opening to criticize, an opening of the mouth, literally, pitchon peh. But opening the mouth means to bring something negative, to bring a question, a judgment, a prosecution, etc. And the more in the public eye you are, the more you're going to get hit by people opening up and saying, who are you? What are you doing here? How come people go to your class? How come you know, all that kind of stuff. So, and God doesn't want that from the tzaddik. Because, look, it works like this. Hashem invests his reputation in us as the Jews, the keepers of his Torah. And if we do things, well, let's say we're all righteous. Wonderful. Bezrat Hashem. The world's going to open up and say things. These Jews, they always find the one bad Jew in a million good Jews. That's pitchon peh. There's always, and it's, don't even blame the other world, the rest of the world. It's the Yetzer Hara himself. That's what his job is to always bring prosecution on the one little point that's no good or has a problem. And so here we see that if you're well known, you're going to get more attraction, you're going to get more negativity automatically. It just goes with the territory. And God doesn't want that for the tzaddik. And I don't want to give the world a chance to open their mouth against the righteous. And I think King David says, happy is he who God mechaseh kol pesha. The God covers over the sin. That is a great gift from God. That he protects our reputations. The world doesn't need to know everything that happens to us. We're not tzaddikim, and even more than tzaddikim. The world doesn't need to know everything. It's better to be hidden. We're working on it. We're a work in progress. I think he wrote something about that, Liat. Very nice. We're perfect and we're a work in progress. I like that. Okay. Well, my Tama, why does God not want to give that more than what I was just trying to say? In the Zohar, it's hard for me to, I can't really show it to you very well on the camera here. There's a nun now, the letter nun, but it's really showing us the calligraphy of the letters. Why? Because a tzaddik, if you look at it, it's actually a nun bent forward, like if that's a nun, right? It bends its head forward, and then it puts a little yud on top. And that's how you create a tzaddik. And nun is the malchut. So the real king is the one who bends his head forward. He bends down, and then he gets that yud on his back. That's the tzaddik. So you see, even the shape of the letters and the way that the Zohar is bringing this to us, the nun, ihi, atya yud, dishma, divrit, kedisha. And the yud is the name of the holy covenant on your back, so to speak. Rechiv Allah, and it rides on you, nun, ahad bahada, and then it becomes one. So the yud and the nun become one to create the tzaddik, right? Yud brit kodesh, the covenant. Nun is malchut, always. Razada, and this secret, kad bara kucha barichu ladam rishon. And with this secret, God created the first man. Du partzuf bara'o, with two faces. What are the two faces? This face over here and this face over here. Those are our two faces. It's not like up and down. It's right and left. And everybody knows if you look in the camera, on one side you have a better look. The other side, my nose looks too big, Ay, ay, ay. But that's actually because our faces are not perfect mirrors of each other. One eye's a little bigger, one eye's a little droopy. I don't know, God forbid, but it happens. Oh, Rhonda wants to meditate. Oh, I'm sorry, Rhonda. Oy, can we meditate? We have another. This paragraph is not done yet. The letter Tzaddik has business here. Where are we? We're at 223. Really, it's up to Michael. I mean, I started late. I'm sorry about that. I'm thoroughly chastised by my computers. Mike, what do you think? Because I know you have a schedule to keep. We have 7 minutes. To start a meditation with 7 minutes is like, that's like fast food, Michael, please, let's do tzaddik. Cindy wants to go into tzaddik. Well, what I was going to do, look, what we can do is just everybody take your favorite letter and meditate on it. Or one of the letters we learned about tonight, even better. Take the tzaddik, for example. There are so many allusions in the tzaddik, you have no idea. And maybe even write them down. What do you see when you look at a tzaddik? Because you're going to see all kinds of things. Okay, so the tzaddik goes on and tells us these two faces, right? These are the two yuds on the tzaddik, but the first yud is really part of the head of the nun. He calls these two faces. What's that telling us? And Adam had these two faces. Begin kach an poi de yud mehadar lachora kagav nada. And because of this, the yud on the back of the nun that creates the tzaddik is facing towards the aleph. That's what he wants to show you. Remember, we had the kuf and the resh facing the taf towards the side of din. Well, the yud is turned around facing the aleph, saying the yud wants to face Ribono Shel Olam, which is the beginning, the reshit, the kedusha of the aleph. And you see that the tzaddik's never drawn with the two yuds facing each other directly. But rather, one is pointing up and back. So looking up. And also, we don't have it pointing down. God said to the letter Tzaddik, Tuvat, you're good. Sometimes we're going to have to change you. We're going to have to take away. We're going to have to change your shape to make you face to face. But in another place, you're going to have to leave. Nafkat mikameh v'azlat. So the tzaddik left before Hashem and went out of the great palace of heaven. Now, what is this last bit here? God is telling the letter tzaddik, in the future, I'm going to take off your face that's turning around, and I'm going to make you face to face in the future. Now, what does that mean? That is a promise of the Zohar. And that's it sounds like what? What's the big deal? It's a little graphic change in the typography. No. It's not like that at all. It's really teaching us something about the future, and I believe we're living in the future. That was, of course, 2,000 years after this was written. עתיד לנסר אותך, לעשות אותך פנים בפנים. Right, in the future, I'm going to make you face to face. במקום אחר, תיכנסי. Right, but in another place, you're going to have to be turned, you're going to have to be turned back, turned within. So I'm going to have to look this one up. I'm going to take a note and write this down because I don't have a proper answer for it. Maybe some of you do. What could it mean that God's going to change the shape of the letter Tzadik and turn the face back? Rather, it seems like that's a normal, in Kabbalah, the whole concept of face-to-face is the idea of Geula. Because anybody knows, if you've been married, when you get upset with somebody, you turn your back on them. You don't want to look at them. And so when you finally look back at them and go face to face again, that's called the redemption of that moment or that relationship. So face to face is always about communication. Like what that English phrase, why do you turn your back? Don't turn your back on me. I think they've made a few songs like that too, right? So the idea of turning that one yud of the tzaddik back to the other yud is this idea of the return, of the union, I believe, of creation and creator. That's my humble offering for the moment. But it would be interesting to look it up. It might also have to do with Partzufim and Sfirot, I'm sure. Okay, and that's the end of the letter Tzaddik. He goes out, he's humbled. But when I first learned that years ago, that idea of the nun bending forward, that's what a tzaddik does. He always bends forward, It's that humility to bend down, to bend our head. We don't like to bend our head. We like to stand tall, right? The head up. And so you see that the tzaddik is teaching us just by the graphics of the letter about human behavior, how we're supposed to be, that we bend our head forward, that we have humility, that we have understanding of self in place, right? That we are people, we are in different places. You're a different person in your office than you are at your home or in the grocery store. And each has an appropriate relationship. And this is part of what we're here to do, is to learn. So I think this was a good beginning. Oh, there we go. That's very nice, Rhonda. It reminds me of the Cheruvim, the Cheruvim. Tzaddik takes on our burdens. That's the truth. Very nice. So that's a good point. The tzaddik takes on the burdens. He's bowing his shoulder. He's taking on the burden. Right. There's a tzaddik in the seven beggars story of Rabbi Nachman. The fifth day is the tzaddik who has big shoulders, and it says he can carry the whole world on his shoulders, but it's a heavy load. So he looks like he's got a hunchback, but it's really only because he's carrying that heavy load of the world. So that really is the function of the tzaddik, because once a person is purified, then he can fix all the time, sweeten things, make things better. So that's certainly a worthwhile goal. All righty. It might be a worthwhile goal to get some sleep here in Israel. It's 2:30. It's been strange. I hope you're all doing well. The whole the world as it turns is certainly getting wobbly, But it says in the Mishnah and Masechet, I believe Moed, it says that the emet ne'ederet, the truth will be missing. There will be no truth. Now, it seems to me, you just have to look at the news a little bit to find that, because every news agency has its own version of things. The government has its version of things. The politics, it's endless. So what do? Well, why is God doing this to us, that we can't find truth? We have the letter Taf wants to be God's seal because I'm part of truth. So the truth is that God wants us to have a relationship with him more than the TV and more than the phone and more than the CNN and more than anything else. He wants us to be in focus and in tune with him. And how could he do it if we don't, you know, he creates so much, all that falsehood just seems to want to drive us to Hashem, because that's where the truth is. We should all be blessed to find that truth, find him inside us, because that's where he lives. That's where he is going to appear in your heart and in your mind. That's where your truth is, your ultimate truth. And this is what we have to work for. And the outer falsehood, okay, noise, turn the volume down. So, anyways, you should have a great Shabbat, a Shabbat of truth, a Shabbat of loving the Torah and turning the letters over. 2,000 years, God is working on this Aleph Bet. There's something there. So, God bless you all, and we will look for you next week, and we'll continue the work. All the best to all of you.